I'm Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitri College, Delhi University, and this lecture is second part of the lecture Samuel Johnson, The Rambler. Now, this lecture is part of the ongoing series on the English essay, where we've been, talking about this form of writing. And in the previous lecture, we talked about Samuel Johnson as the literary figure, what were his contributions to literature. We also understood, a bit about his writing style, and most importantly, we focused on the Rambler, which was the periodical that was published and that was brought out by Johnson for 2 years, in addition to other periodicals that also came into that was also introduced by Johnson. So we also said that how Rambler departs from the existing tradition of essay writing or periodicals of the time. So what are the departures that we noticed in Rambler? First of all, that the themes were not very non-serious, right? It adopted a very stately language, and the themes were also equally significant, important, serious, that we noticed that were published in this periodical, right? So the theme and then the language to match with it were the two departures that we saw in Johnson's The Rambler, right? Continuing from there, what we also say is that it's not surprising that The Rambler was never very popular as a periodical at the point of time, right? Now, the sale was large when it was reprinted in volumes. So, at the time when it was printed, periodically, then, well, of course, it was not very popular because Johnson was not editing the manuscript as much and was very quickly writing and publishing. But then the sale was large when it was printed in volumes, but few of the original numbers reached a circulation of more than 500. So you see, that's somewhat what we understand of its popularity. Now, but the other thing that we said was that the collected editions were more popular than when this periodic, when it was published periodically, right? Now, what were the reasons? And then there could be two reasons. That's what the critics say. Two reasons for the superior popularity of the collected editions of the Rambler. They say that it could be due to the fact that these editions, the collected editions, were better. Why were they better? So, while Johnson wrote the original Ramblers rapidly and with little or no revision, he spent great care and pains upon the subsequent editions, right? The collected editions. So, that could be one of the possible reasons that how in the other form, this set of essays became more popular. The next thing is that the Rambler had more the character of a book for serious meditation than for agreeable pastime. Now, you see, this is something that we have been maintaining all throughout. We talked about it in the previous lecture, and now we see the same thing but in a different context, right? So, one of the reasons why the Rambler was maybe not as popular also was that it did not talk about scandals. It did not talk about people. It did not talk about what was happening in somebody's life, who was seeing whom. While these were some of the petty, topics, or actually one should not call petty, but well, these were some of the concerns that the other essayists would, engage with and publish about and write about in the time. But the Rambler was more like a book for serious meditation, for serious thought, than for merely for a pastime. right? While the other essays also had food for thought, but well, there was also content for entertainment or pastime, as they say. But that was not the case with Rambler. So, what critics say is that perhaps this could be the second reason for why Rambler could not be as popular as the other periodicals. Um, and you see, just to give you a sense of how the Rambler uh, was more like a meditative, was like a book for serious meditation instead of talking about flimsy stuff. Just to give you a sense of that, I'll tell you that in the original issue, we find the weight and the dignity of the paper on the superiority of patience to stoicism. Now, this is what one of the papers in the original issue talks about: the superiority of patience to stoicism. And the high mindedness of the essay on dedications showed that the writer was a man of no ordinary gifts. Now, you see, when he's talking about superiority of patience to stoicism, now what is stoicism? Where you, choose not to, respond, very in a very impassioned manner to situations and circumstance. You become a stoic, like, or in fact, you sometimes fail to respond, and sometimes you choose not to respond, right? So, but so this essay talked about the superiority of patience to stoicism, that how you need to remain patient with circumstances, the ups and downs of life, instead of becoming stoic, totally unmoved, totally unimpacted, etc. So patience is a bigger virtue or a higher virtue than stoicism. So this was one of the topics that was taken up by a paper in the original issue of the Rambler. So you see, this was the depth, or this was the kind of engagement that we notice in Johnson's Rambler, right? So so far we've seen, we've talked about the reasons for why Rambler was not as popular as the other periodicals. And the other thing is that we've also looked at a bit about what were the themes and what were these so to say elevated or serious ideas that Johnson engaged with in the Rambler, right? Now, moving on, we are now going to look at a few selections from the Rambler's 4th edition that was published in 1756. Okay, so far we've looked at the Rambler theoretically in terms of, we've talked about its theme, its language, its popularity, its frequency of publication, its comparison and contrast to the other periodicals. So all that we've seen so far, but now let us actually take a look at some of the selections from the fourth edition of the paper as well. Now, what we say is that now you see, I mean, we need to go through those quotations, and it's important for us to to be able to notice that as well. So when we look at the quote from the Rambler, we notice that how there are in fact in the 4th edition, what he ends up talking about is that he engages with the idea of the novel, and what exactly was the novel like, and what is the novel form all about, and at the same time what were the writers writing about, etc., right? So these were some of the things, I mean, these were the topics that Johnson had talked about in the 4th edition of the Rambler. Now you see, once again connecting it to what we had mentioned in the beginning, that the topics that he chose to talk about were serious. So here he engages with something literary, that is the novel form, or what he calls as the modern romances, right? And in fact that's what he even talks about eventually, that how the the novel is actually seen as a modern romance as well, right? That's in fact a term that he gives to the novel form as well. But what we see then is that what he says is that while this form deals with fiction, it is a form that is imaginative, but at the same time its its thoughts, the ideas that it talks about, are very well rooted in the reality of the times, right? That's the first very important thing that he talks about in this issue, in this 4th edition of the Rambler, right? That is, that while as a form the novel is deep into creativity and imagination, but at the same time, what is its connection with reality? How important that connection with reality is something that we note with the novel form. And at the same time, what he also says is that a lot of times what we see is that there are a series of events, one after the other, that take place in a novel, right? But in real life, things may not transpire exactly in the same way, but well, the insights that come through from those connections of various events, that is what makes a difference. So that's a very important point that he makes about fiction or the novel form in the 4th edition of the Rambler, right? So where he's talking about imagination, he's talking about the narrative, the way a narrative is constructed in fiction, and most importantly, how does it relate to reality, or what connection does it have with reality? Because once again, connecting it to what we were discussing before, that how for Johnson, it is these serious concerns, it is these thoughts which had some depth that were of interest to him when he was writing. So quite obviously in this edition, when he's thinking about the novel form, he thinks that he talks about that what is the connection between this style of writing, which is, even though full of fantasy, full of creativity, full of imagination, but at the same time, where is its interface with reality? How do those events, the way they are represented in the fiction form, what connection do they have with the real? That's one of the important points that he engages with in that particular edition, right? Now the next thing that he also talks about in that edition is that he thinks about the characters, right? Now once again the question comes that while in the novel or in the narrative or in fiction, characters are quote unquote contrived, they are made up, right? The author comes up with characters. He thinks about, just like he thinks about certain situations or circumstances, likewise he comes up with different characters, right? So once again the same question arises, that how faithfully is such a form of expression then able to talk about the actual human nature, right? So for a character that's actually figment of someone's imagination, that is the author's imagination or the fiction writer's imagination, to what extent would it then have a connection with actual or real human nature? Now, this is the other thing that he takes up for discussion or analysis in that particular edition. Right now, once again, this is a very important question, and also helping you connect it to what we had initially talked about. Remember, that's the very first thing that we said about Johnson in the beginning of the lecture, that how one of the things that truly distinguishes him as a writer of repute were his insights into human nature, right? So that's something that is very, very important to Johnson as a writer and thinker. So therefore, when he thinks about the novel form as well, he goes over the aspect of the fact that when we create a character, or when a fiction writer or when a novelist create a character, to what extent is he able to do justice to the insights on human nature. So over there he makes a point that as readers we need to be aware that the good and the bad, the promising and the aspects which are not very palatable, all of them are found in the characters that are created by the novelist, just as the case is with people in actual life, right? So that's a very important point that he ends up making, that how characters are not either black or white, how characters can never be talked about as either being good or as being completely evil or dark. But what he says is that the two aspects almost always they coexist in the character that the author creates, right? And that is where he is able to reflect the reality of human nature as well, that how these aspects they kind of coexist in actual life too. So that's the second important observation that that Johnson makes when he's thinking about the novel form, or what he calls as the modern romance. Now, in fact, before we go ahead, it's also important for us to look at the term the modern romance, because he calls it novel or the modern romance. Now, which means what? That he is using the two terms interchangeably, right? So novel, of course, we know is a form, it's a fictional form, but why does he call it a modern romance, right? Two things. Now, the word romance, we know, refers back to a literary style that we witnessed in English literature. There were romance novels. So, which means what? Romance not in the sense of how we understand the term, but technically speaking, it means that they were really, texts that were really invested in imagination. So where there was a very pronounced and a very enhanced sense of imagination, created worlds which were very different from what we experience in our day-to-day life. For example, there would be fairies, there would be knights, etc. So all those would be the characters and the preoccupations of a romance, right? So, but the long and short of it being a very excessive and an intense, investment in imagination. So that's what romance is, right? But he calls it a modern romance. Now, what does the word modern imply? Now, the word modern tells us that, now again, like as students of literature, we know that the word modern itself also has multiple implications. First, of course, is the temporal idea that something which is not to do with past, something which is contemporary, something which is forward looking is modern, right? That's one of the understandings. But if we think of the term modern in terms of the value systems, modern also stands for the secular. Modern stands for where the focus is on the human instead of on maybe, either the divine or any outside agency. So when he titles the fourth edition of Rambler as modern romance or the novel, we see that we kind of get a sense of what Johnson exactly means, or how he thinks about this style of writing or this genre of writing, that is fiction or novel, right? And we just mentioned that how when he talks about the narrative events, or when he talks about the characters, so he's actually thinking that for a form which is rooted in fiction, which is rooted in imagination, what are, or what does its interface with reality look like, right? How does it comment on human nature? How does it comment on society and real life or reality? So this was a very important thought, or idea that he takes up for discussion in this particular edition. So that's why you see, we also notice that the title then that he gives to this edition of the Rambler very well invokes the content that that he also ends up writing. So once again, it tells us about what? That it tells us about the seriousness of the content and the intent that we see in Johnson as an essayist, as as compared to, or one can say in quite a contrast to the preceding essayists, who then also engaged in discussing about scandals. And if you go back to the lecture on Elizabeth Heywood, we discussed over there, in fact in one of the periodicals called The Parrot, if you go back to that discussion, please contrast the discussion of Elizabeth of Eliza Heywood in Parrot, and contrast it to what we just now discussed, that is Johnson's discussion of the novel or the modern romance in his fourth edition of the Rambler. You will immediately be able to place that, what are the distinctions that we have just now drawn, and where and how does Rambler as a form then distinguishes, as a periodical, distinguishes itself from its predecessors, right? And one of the last very important points that he also makes in the fourth edition of the Rambler, while yes, it is about I would say 4 or 5 pages in length of his meditations on the novel form, but these are some of the points that he ends up making, which I've brought up for discussion. So one of the other things that he also discusses is that which is slightly towards the end, where he once again evokes the Holy Spirit. He kind of addresses a higher power, and talks about the fact that how may he be given that ability to correct the follies, right? Likewise, just like the novel form, which also throws a scanner at, which also observes and in the process critically analyzes human nature, right? The idea of vice, folly, virtue, these were some of the words which were very, very common in the 18th century parlance, right? So we see Johnson also evoke these words towards the end of his fourth edition of the Rambler, where he says that just like the novel form, which also deals with these the idea of folly, vice, virtue, etc., give me also the strength to in that sense, as an author, as a writer, to be able to do justice to this purpose of writing as well, right? So very broadly speaking, these were some of the concerns that he brings up for discussion in the fourth edition of his Rambler. So I'm sure that with the discussion of these points, all the observations that we had made about Samuel Johnson, about the Rambler, about this particular periodical, his writing style, everything comes together and falls in perspective. When we look at some of these ideas and the points that Johnson makes in this edition, right? So as I said, that this was just one short excerpt that we had discussed from the Rambler. Along with that, there are various other ideas, thoughts and issues which are both literary and social in nature that we find discussed in Rambler. In fact, if you just look up a few editions of the Rambler and go through them, you will have a sense of what were the preoccupations of this periodical, and also how it scored or how it came across as very different from what Steele wrote, or for that matter what Addison wrote in their periodicals. In fact, it will be a very interesting exercise for those interested to kind of bring up this comparison of excerpts, let's say from the Tatler, the Spectator and the Rambler. Or we could perhaps even just take up one from the initial, that is, you could either take up the Tatler or you could take up the Spectator and then compare it to the Rambler and its various sections. So all the points about the language, about the difference in expression, about the difference in preoccupations, about the difference in the author's approach, etc., would automatically become clear when you see them in when you see these texts in actual comparison, right? So in this lecture we primarily understood that foremost, that what were the reasons for the Rambler not being very popular at the time when it was published. Then we once again compared it to its predecessors, and thereafter we discussed about the fourth edition of the Rambler, and we tried to understand that what are some of the important ideas that he brings up while discussing modern romance, or what he calls as the novel form, right? So I would urge you to look up other sections of the Rambler as well, and maybe in the coming lectures we will take up other periodicals by Samuel Johnson that we had mentioned today, and we are going to see that what are the ideas and the topics that he takes up for discussion there. Thank you.